friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and as promised in last week's video, which was the end of our Every Bit Counts challenge, that is the food preservation challenge that we did all through the month of August, and I'd shown you all of these food preservation projects that we had done to try to store away food for the winter. And in the end of that series of videos, I said that I would bring you a pantry tour to kind of show you where we're at this point in the year. I'm just going to show you canned goods and dried goods, my freeze-dried goods, things like that. The things that are in my kitchen and down in my cellar. I'm not going to do a full freezer tour in this video. I might do that in another video. So I guess I'll start by showing you what we have up here. Let's talk a little bit about my working pantry. So there's a difference between the pantry that I pull food from multiple times a day or sometimes maybe just daily versus the long-term storage that is down in our cellar. So I keep small quantities of items up here for quick meals and things. I store bulk amounts of food down in the cellar. So let's go ahead and get started. In my kitchen, I like to keep a collection of grains and things to work with for the baking projects I'm going to do throughout the week. So a lot of the jars that are on these shelves are gallon glass jars of whole grains. I know right here I have whole corn. This we will grind up to make cornmeal or to make corn flour. When I want to make things like cornbread, that's what I'll use. We do have a grain mill, and I recommend anyone who wants to get into any kind of serious food storage for your family, you definitely want to purchase a grain mill. It's a great multi-purpose tool. What it will allow you to do is to buy your grains in bulk with the seed intact. So we have the whole corn here. Up here I have whole wheat berries. I have whole oat groats in another jar. I have another jar down here of whole buckwheat. When the seed is intact on the grain, the storage, the shelf life of it is much longer. And so we can keep those items in storage here and then just grind it into flour as needed. Those flours will be much more nutritious when they're freshly ground versus if I had to buy separate jars of all these flours. I might have some whole buckwheat that I want to make a kasha, and then I'd have buckwheat flour separately. And then maybe I'll have a thing of wheat flour and a thing of oat flour, and then my rolled oats, and then my corn flour and my cornmeal. It's just a lot of extra jars that I would need versus just having one jar holding the grain, and then I can use those grains for multiple purposes. So my jar of oat groats up here, I have an oat roller machine. You can actually see the handle of it. It's a hand crank oat roller. I can take these whole oat groats, I can roll them through that machine, and that's how we get our oatmeal to make oatmeal breakfast or granola or things. I can also take these oat groats and run them through my grain mill and make an oat flour from them. So lots of different ways that I can use that. And like I said, because that grain, the seed of it is intact, the shelf life of it is much longer than if I bought the items that were already rolled or the flour that was already ground. Those flours really would need to be stored in a freezer or at least a fridge to extend the shelf life of those and to preserve the nutrients in them. So up here I do like to keep just some random canned goods. If I go downstairs and I'm just thinking about how in the next week I'll probably use one of these items, I'll just bring them up here and tuck them away on the shelf. So we always do have a selection of canned goods that we keep in the working pantry. But as far as the dried goods go, we have our whole grains. I keep dried beans up here. We have kidney beans, pinto beans, nuts. I see cashew pieces. We use that to make our cashew milk. I'll also soak cashews. We'll make like a cashew cream cheese out of that. You guys have seen me, you saw me last month make a pesto using cashews instead of pine nuts. So I buy a lot of my nuts, actually all of my nuts, seeds, grains, beans, all of those things I buy in bulk from Azure Standard. That's where I get the best prices, and I typically will buy them in 10 to 25 to sometimes even 50-pound quantities. I will fill up a glass gallon jar with small amounts to keep up here in the working pantry, If there are leftovers, they'll go either in Mylar, downstairs in storage, if it's something that I'm not going to use up rather quickly. If it's something I know that I'll probably use up in the next 6 months, it will go in a plastic 5-gallon food grade bucket and go downstairs. And then as these jars empty, I can just run them downstairs, refill the jars with the dried grains and nuts and seeds and things, and put them back up here. The exception to that is the nuts. I actually do keep extra bulk nuts in the freezer. Nuts have such a high fat content that they will go rancid much faster than some of these grains and beans and things. So it is best with the fat content of your nuts to keep the extras stored in the fridge or freezer. Now this shelf is mostly freeze-dried foods. The majority, and you'll see when we get down in the cellar, the majority of my freeze-dried foods are kept in Mylar and stored away in long-term storage. But I do like to keep some jars up here just for quick usage. Things like, these are dried celery greens. It's just nice if I'm making a pot of broth to just be able to sprinkle half of this jar into the roaster to season my broth. So things like that. This is dried kale for quick smoothies. It's the kind of thing it would be really inconvenient to have to open up Mylar, and it wouldn't be as like cost effective to use the Mylar and the oxygen absorber for something that you're just gonna open a jar and sprinkle a little bit out of every now and then when you want to make a smoothie. So that's what most of these are. Spinach powder for smoothies. I know there's like dried garlic scapes. I preserved those with you guys earlier this summer. So things like that. This bottom shelf is a lot of, because I keep it on the bottom because these are the things that I don't use very often. You guys saw me in my last video using citric acid for canning. So things like that. This is the calcium water that I use with my Pomona's pectin that I buy in bulk. I see potato starch. A lot of these things are things that I use for gluten-free baking. I don't do a ton of gluten-free baking, but it is something I do every now and then. So I have things like guar gum and just random things like that. I see cow lime down there. That's what I use to water glass my eggs. So a lot of those things that I'm only going to use every couple of months, if that. I just kind of keep them down here, kind of out of the way, but I still want them up in the kitchen for when I do want to use them. All right, guys, things that are used a little more frequently, kind of over here on this side, things like popcorn, cacao powder, which is like cocoa powder, but it's the kind that's non-alkalized. I don't know. There's a process that cocoa powder goes through where maybe like a metal or something is added to it. This is more in the raw form. Got that here. There's some whole blue corn. I also use that to make cornbread in my grain mill. Salt here when I want to refill my salt shakers. Gluten-free flour. This is masa flour. That's what we use to make homemade tortillas. Nutritional yeast. We use this to make like fake cheeses and things. We also like to sprinkle it on popcorn when we're making popcorn. Dried fruit like raisins and dried cranberries we'll keep up here. I see some white chocolate chips. Usually I have a jar of regular chocolate chips, but I think the kids juice them up. We have wild rice, powdered sugar. I have some water glassed eggs up here. You'll see that I have some water glass eggs down in the cellar, but in moving them down there this year, we had a lot of eggs that cracked in the journey going downstairs. Obviously going up and down the stairs, the eggs can shake against the glass and can break, and then that affects them in storage. So then I started keeping them up here. So I have a few jars of them up here, and I think in future years I'll probably store all of them up here so we don't break eggs while we transfer them. Down here we have arrowroot powder. We use that a lot as a gluten-free thickener. If we're going to make something like chicken pot pie, I can't have gluten, so this is what I'll use to thicken up my gravy. And things like that. We have more raisins, coconut flour. This is that whole buckwheat that I was talking about. Liver powder, just random things, shredded coconut, all of that. So that is my working pantry. If I'm gonna bake something, I generally will grab it from here, or I also have 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it's just 4 5-gallon buckets upstairs, and those contain items that it doesn't really make sense to put in gallon jars, or else I would just be refilling them rather frequently. So we have a 5-gallon bucket of sugar up here that we pull from. I have one of rice. There's one of pre-ground wheat flour. I'm trying to remember what the other one, I think the other one might at this point just have extra oat groats in it because I didn't take the bucket downstairs. But so I do have those bulk quantities up here of those items, just to make it easy. And when I want to use some sugar, I'll just go open my bucket and put in my measuring cup and do it straight from the 5-gallon bucket. Then up here I also have my working spice cabinet. As I mentioned, I have some bulk quantities of spices over there in the pantry. I have a lot of the freeze-dried spices downstairs, and then as they empty, we'll go down and refill them. But this is my working spice cabinet. I like it to have it right by my stove for easy meals. I can just open up my cabinet here and dump in what I need. So that is what we're working with. Feels much better down here than it does upstairs. It was about 85 degrees Fahrenheit today here in Northwest Ohio. Down here it's around 65 degrees. That is rather warm for the root cellar. It's been really warm lately, and so that's the temperature it kind of stays down here this time of year. In the winter, it stays about 35 to 40 degrees, somewhere around there. It never dropped below freezing, obviously, down here, but it did stay kind of usually around that 40-degree mark, and the humidity is perfect down here. We do run a dehumidifier to help with that, but otherwise it just stays nice and cool down here, which is perfect. So I'll start back there. That is what is left of our garlic harvest. I do have a bag of garlic upstairs. We have maybe 8 bags hanging over there. That's how I prefer to store my garlic. I like to put it in these little bags. Each one maybe has a dozen or so large heads of garlic. As the one upstairs is finished, I'll come down here and grab a new bag and bring it up. So that is what we're working with. It doesn't seem like a lot of garlic when you think 8 bags with 12 heads of garlic in each bag, and that has to last us all the way until the next garlic harvest. But you have to remember that a lot of the garlic and the onion that we harvested this year has already been put into jars. And I've also pickled garlic. I've freeze-dried garlic scapes into powder. I've pickled garlic scapes. I even have like frozen garlic pesto and things. So we have garlic preserved in multiple ways. That will be more than enough to get us through. And then I have a garlic seed hanging over in another area. That is the garlic that will go in the garden. We usually plant in the month of October. And then onions, you'll see when I show you a full shot. I also do the same thing with my onions. These are Patterson onions. They are a good storage variety. I like to put, I'm trying to remember, maybe I did about a dozen of those also per bag in a variety of sizes. Some of them are larger, some of them are medium-sized onions. And put them in a bag, and just like going to the grocery store, I buy the bag, and then when that's done, I can come down, grab a new bag to bring up. It's just a really easy way for me to store them and transfer them upstairs. I can't get a good shot of this top shelf here because the light is kind of in the way. Let me see if I can show you. You see the jars up there. But anyways, that whole top shelf is, half of it is canned potatoes. We mostly use those for making things like beef stew. I also like to fry up the canned potatoes for breakfast. They also make a really amazing potato salad. They're pre-cooked, so you can dump them, add your mayonnaise and all of your seasonings and green onions and things. Just a super easy way to make a potato salad, so we enjoy that. In the middle of this shelf, I have some canned carrots, and on the other side of the shelf is all homemade vinegars. I see red wine vinegar up there, apple scrap vinegar, there's even some peach scrap vinegar, so lots of those. People always ask what I use all those vinegars for. Mostly for salad dressings. and other things. When we have animals that are sick, I like to put a little bit of that vinegar in their water to give it a little probiotic boost and things like that. But anywhere that you would use store-bought apple cider vinegar, that's where we use my homemade vinegars. This whole shelf here, those are soup bases. I told you guys that was the kind of goal of my canning this year. I wanted to have a lot of meals in jars. And I don't have as much as I would like to have before the baby comes, but we're going to still work on that. So to give you some perspective on these shelves, they go 5 quart jars deep. So it's kind of deceptive. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 13 rows across and there's 5 jars deep. So that gives me what, like 65 quart jars per shelf. So the soup bases that I do have, this is white chicken chili. We have just a regular chicken soup base, chicken and corn chowder, split pea soup base, just a regular ham soup base, and beef stew, southwestern vegetable soup, and then more of just a tomato soup. So we've got lots of different selections here. Most of those recipes are from videos last month. So if you're looking for any of those, you can check them out in the videos I put out in the month of August. This next shelf here is all different jams and jellies. Blackberry marmalade, blueberry jam, blackberry jam, cherry jelly, and then there's cherry jam behind it. This is strawberry jam. These are all fruit butters. So we have apple butter, pear butter, and peach butter. Pear vanilla jelly, peach jam. Let me get over here. Peach jam, and then these are all just random jellies. I think there's dandelion jelly back there, a couple of wildflower jellies, and then at the very end is tomato jam. So we will easily go through about 2 to 3 of these jars per week. And so we're sitting pretty good so far for the year. Once apple season comes, what often happens, and you'll find in our apple storage over there, is we will go to an orchard in October and we will purchase our apples for fresh eating for the season. And that'll typically be about 8 bushels full of apples. And we'll fill up our refrigerator that is outside in the garage, and it'll just be full of those apples. And we'll just grab a bag and bring them in whenever we want fresh apples. Well, usually sometime in maybe February or March, some of those apple varieties will start to go soft. So then those apples will be processed down either into applesauce or things like apple butter if we're getting low on preserves like that. So once this gets eaten through, there will always be apple butter to replace it. I also have a lot of frozen fruit in the freezers. So if we are low on jam or jelly, I can always grab a bag of frozen blueberries or something like that and whip up a quick batch of jam in 20 to 25 minutes. So all right, now moving out, this whole next shelf is tomato sauce, and I ran out of room on that shelf for all the tomato sauce, so any extras get boxed up and put back in storage, and then I replenish these shelves as needed with things like that. So we use this, I showed this in the last video when I was canning tomato sauce. We use this not only to make our pasta sauce, I'll use this sometimes to make chili or tomato-based soups or things like that. We can never have too much tomato sauce. And in fact, I am not done with tomato sauce. I purchased the tomatoes to make this sauce because our garden is not doing great and is still lagging behind, but I still have some plants with a lot of fruit that are maturing. And so I will probably do another batch of tomatoes here in the month of September. So that's all different sizes. I have some pints and some quarts of tomato products. This next shelf right here is all pickled foods. So I know from the end, I'm just going to go through these. I don't know if you can see it. It's banana peppers all the way on this end, right behind the onions. And then we have pickled garlic scapes, and then there's celery in both of those rows, pickled celery. There's a sweet relish there. pickled okra, small jars of dilly beans. Those are pickled jalapenos, and that's a mix of different hot peppers. And this end over here, the sloppy joe base that I showed you guys last month, as well as chili base. And chili base is another thing that I will be canning a lot of here in the next month. My kids will eat chili once or twice a week if they want to. And while right now, like yesterday, I made chili for them for lunch, it's easy for me to just whip it up, chop the onion, chop the garlic. We have fresh peppers right now coming in from the garden, so I get it all put together. But I know once the baby comes, I'm not going to want to be standing there making lunch from scratch every day. So I like to have these canned bases where I can just dump all of the flavorings for the chili in a pot, dump in some tomato juice or tomato sauce, add a can of beans, add some ground beef and things, mix it all up and just let it simmer there at a time that is convenient for me. And then, because maybe during lunch when I should be making lunch, the baby could need me and need to be nursing or something. So having a lot of these bases just makes for really convenient meals when the baby comes. So we will be doing a lot more of that. I have a little space on that shelf to hopefully fill in some more of that. Okay, here's some more of those water glassed eggs that I mentioned. I think I have 3 jars. So this was a year where I did not water glass as many jars as I have in the past. Typically in the past I've done 10 jars of water glassed eggs easily. This year I think I only have 5 or 6, and that's because last year I found that the breeds that we've been doing a lot of ISA browns in the last couple of years, and they just kept laying through the winter, so we're doing well. We also have a lot of freeze-dried eggs, so I gave away more eggs this year and just water glassed less. So we have enough here to get us through the winter, hopefully, with what the chickens and ducks will be laying and what we have freeze-dried. And then all the rest of this, well, I have 1 row here of sweet potatoes, I believe. These are beets, and then all of these are pie filling. What I have here of peach pie filling and pear pie filling is left over from last year. I have a little bit of blueberry pie filling and some apple pie filling, and so I think in all I might have like 21 quarts or so of pie filling down there. It's not a ton, but I know that during apple season I'll probably do another batch or 2 of apple pie filling, and that will be more than enough. We didn't really bake a lot of pies last year. And when I did bake pies, I did things like pumpkin pie a lot. So I think we'll be okay. Maybe we're past, there used to be years where I would do like 50 to 75 quarts of pie filling and we would use them all. We didn't do a lot of pie filling, which is evident by us having some left over. And then over there on the other side is all juice. Those are quarts of grape juice and cranberry juice. And so that hole right there, that hole will be filled in probably with pie filling or maybe some more cranberry juice. We'll see. All right, and then the very bottom shelf, all the way on the corner over there behind these containers where you can't see, those are all green beans. Next to that, we have some canned squash. And then canned greens, a lot of that is canned kale and maybe some spinach. And then all of the rest of that is canned sweet corn. So that is what this whole shelving unit contains. Let's do the next one. This really is a hard space to film in, especially by yourself. I should have hired a child to be a cameraman to kind of do this for me, because it is a confined space and you can't really set up the camera in a good spot to get everything. So hopefully you guys are bearing with me on this. But okay, this top shelf here is a lot of freeze-dried things. So you can see, you know, we've got spearmint, lemon balm, chocolate mint, lemon basil. I see regular basil. We have some dried cayennes, all sorts of things. And there's some chamomile for tea. So as my jar's upstairs empty, I can come down and refill with what is on that shelf. This shelf right here is all fruit syrups. And then we have hot sauces. I have a Sugar Rush peach sauce and a cayenne sauce. These are pickled red onions, pickled ginger, and then this is the tomato paste that we canned in the last video down here on the end. This next shelf down here, this is more grape juice. These are grape juice concentrate. So if you look at these, the actual grapes aren't in the jar. This is because I boiled the grapes down into a really thick concentrated juice for these. And so when I want to use this juice, I would add a lot of water to this to make it palatable. Whereas over there I showed you some quarts of juice, and those are just ready to go. I can strain the grapes out of those jars and just have a juice that is ready to drink out of those. So I do have them done both ways. I think all of these are great. Yeah. Then next to it, we have some more pints of tomato sauce that didn't fit on that shelf. This is a corn relish. I took a year off from canning these because I did too much last year and we had some extra. So these are really good as a dip, like with corn chips. Just eat them that way. They're great on tacos. I just didn't go through them last year for some reason. I'll have years where we'll just eat this like crazy. Then there's some years where we don't like them much. And now it looks like I have a cricket friend down here who's keeping us company. So sorry about that. Then at the end of this shelf, down here you'll see chutneys. If you guys remember, last year was my year in experimenting with chutneys. It was a new food for us. We'd never had them, and I did apple chutney and pear chutney. And while we liked them, I think I'm just really a creature of habit in my cooking. It's like I have our tried and true recipes, and when you have 8 kids with various taste buds and preferences, it's very rare that you want to stray a lot from the meals that you know everyone will eat, because you hate to go to the effort to cook something different that then half of the kids won't like. It's just, when there's so many different taste preferences to consider, I tend to get stuck in routines and habits. So I didn't incorporate those chutneys into my meals like I thought I would last year. I did use probably half of what I canned. Hopefully, because we used up that much or more last year, I'll get through them this year, but I'm not sure it's something that we will can again, just because I kind of didn't know how to use them. I thought that we would like bake bread and just kind of spread it on bread, but when I would bake bread, kids would ask for, hey mom, can we have some cherry jam with this bread? And it just, you know, the chutney never was something that came to my mind to use that way. So I mostly used them in the crock pot, like with roasts as flavoring, and it was really good that way. So, all right, next shelf. Okay, these next shelves are pretty easy. We have a whole shelf here of canned beans. These are home canned beans. I have, think if I can remember, lima beans, I have garbanzo beans, black beans, kidney beans. There's even some prepared baked beans. What else am I missing? Lots of jars of those. Obviously we use those where you would use canned beans. In chili, we use the garbanzo beans for hummus and things like that. And so this is the kind of thing that, like I mentioned, this shelf, once this empties this winter, my job will be replenishing that with all the dried beans that we have in the house. People always ask, why do you go to the trouble to can beans when you could just cook them from the dried beans? And it's, most of my canning is about convenience. It's just a lot easier to have them pre-cooked, be able to dump them out and just use them, versus having to take the time to soak the beans overnight and then cook them the next day. So, canned beans. The next shelf down is, this is all French onion broth. I told you that we canned up a lot of the onions that we had in storage into broth, and there are quite a few of those down there. That will make French onion soup. I like to dump those in with a roast. I got some criticism for calling these a French onion soup base, because technically you would caramelize your onions first before you would make French onion soup from scratch, and everybody knows that, but I call it a French onion soup base because I use it the way you would use, like if you bought a Campbell's French onion soup concentrate in the jar and you wanted to like pour that over a roast or something like that. There are a lot of recipes that call for that. That's what I use this for instead. I very rarely make actual French onion soup because I can't eat bread and we can't have dairy. And that's what makes French onion soup good, is when you put the bread and the cheese over the top. So I call it a French onion soup base just because it's beef broth with some of the seasonings like Worcestershire and, I said that wrong again, what is it? Worcestershire sauce. Sorry, my brain has a hard time computing that. So a lot of those flavors that would be in the French onion soup, minus the caramelization of the onions, it's still delicious. Dump it over a beef roast, one of the best roasts you'll eat. So that's what I'll do in the crock pot a lot this winter. On the other side over there, canned chicken and chicken broth. That whole shelf will need replenished here when we do our chicken canning. And then the whole bottom shelf is beef broth. So looking good on the beef broth. We also have a whole steer full of bones to work through. So as we use those up here in the coming months, I'll spend the winter replenishing that beef broth. Okay, here we have a little more of the home canning over here on this shelf. Actually, this freezer right here is new. We moved this in this year. We actually had a freezer that malfunctioned in the middle of the summer, and it was like a catastrophe because it was completely full and we had no idea what to do. And it did take Adam about a week to get the parts in. It's a commercial freezer, so he had to order the parts and wait for them to come in. So in the meantime, so that we didn't lose all the food that was in the freezer, we purchased this little small freezer for down here and another small freezer in Adam's garage, and now we have extra freezers. So I'm actually going to use this to store fruits and vegetables in, but I need to reorganize all the freezers before I take you on that tour, and it got up to, you know, the high 80s this week, and that's actually what made my freezer malfunction over the summer. It got to, it was like 97 degrees that day, and I opened the freezer for just about 2 minutes to search through to find something, and it's like the freezer kicked on and just couldn't keep up with the heat then to compensate for from having that door open. So I have learned now not to open the doors when it gets that warm. So I did not want to organize freezers for this video. So we'll do that in another one. That's eventually, this will be fruits and vegetables. Over here, these are all canned pears. And those are all quarts of fruit sauce. We have applesauce, pear sauce, and peach sauce. And then the next shelf down are pints of the same thing, apple, pear, and peach sauce. So that may not look like a lot. Once again, these fit 5 quarts deep. You just can't see it from the angle. But the same thing that I mentioned with like apple butter will happen with applesauce. So we will primarily eat fresh apples from October through maybe February or March. And then once the storage apples start to go soft, then we will process into sauce. And so what we have here, combined with the storage fruit that we will have for fresh eating, will get us through most of the winter. And then we will replenish these shelves with whatever we need to process from the leftover storage apples. More grape juice down here. This is just a little bit of potatoes left from our small harvest. I still have potatoes that I planted a little later in the season that are out in the garden. We will harvest those this fall. Those will go here, and it won't be enough. What I harvest for the garden probably will not be enough for our family. We do have some canned potatoes. We will have those, but I will probably purchase sometime in November or December a 50-pound box of potatoes from Azure Standard and add that down here, and that should get us through the winter. We have another shelving unit over here, and this is all primarily store-bought food with the exception of these cans of beef over here. We grow our own beef. We are very blessed to have a butcher that does commercial canning for grocery stores, so they have all of the equipment to can beef this way. So if it's a year where we process more beef than maybe our freezers could handle, or more beef than we think that we would use in a year, we will have them take, we did one heifer, what year was it? 2023? Yeah. No? Beginning of 2023, I think, or the end of 2022. We had one extra heifer that we just decided to put into these jars. And they have a shelf life, yeah, it would have been 2023. Because it says best by 1/5/2028. So it would have been on 1/5/2023 that was processed, because they give us a 5-year shelf life on these. So these are just like an insurance policy. It's such a blessing. We thought this year we actually didn't think we were going to be able to source calves. We don't keep a bull on our property. We don't keep milk cows or beef cows or anything like that. We actually buy weaned calves every year to grow up into our beef. And over the last 2 or 3 years, the price of beef calves has skyrocketed. It's astronomical. We used to be able to get a beef calf, a weaned calf that was maybe like 10 weeks old, for what did we pay the first year? Like $300 or $325. And this was for a heifer calf that was half Angus and half Holstein, I believe. And this year you couldn't find any that were under $1,000. Like, that's how much it has changed in the 4 years or so that we have been doing this. And we looked everywhere. So we didn't think that we were going to even do calves this year. And then finally we found an affordable source that ended up working out kind of at the last minute. So we do have calves. But if there ever were a year, we were really grateful we had all of this canned up, because if there is a year where we can't find calves, we could just eat off of this beef for a whole year. So that's why we do this. This year we already harvested a steer in May, I think. And then we are going to harvest 2 heifers in December. So we've already decided one whole heifer will go into the freezer, and then the steaks from the other heifer will go into the freezer, and any other really desirable cuts that we like the brisket and stuff. And the rest will be canned up. And people always ask what this is like. It's chunked meat, kind of like roast. So it's great for making a stew. We use it in chili. We use it to make barbecued beef sandwiches. We've even used it in like tacos shredded up. So really versatile, really tasty. Ask your butcher if they do commercial canning. Maybe they can do this for you. Okay guys, so the rest of this shelf, as I mentioned, is store-bought food. A lot of these canned goods, and I can already hear it. I already know. I'm going to hear people saying things about the brands that are down here and the healthiness of some of them. Yes, there's Spam down there and Ortega taco sauce. But here's the thing. I exist in a marriage. I've been married for almost 18 years now, and I like to think I exist in a successful marriage where we're happy. And the reason we're happy is because there's give and take. So I have my standards for what I like to eat. My husband has his standards and preferences for what he likes to eat. He loves Spam. I've never eaten Spam in my life. He absolutely loves it, and he loves it because he ate it as a child, and I think there's nostalgia with it. I also think a couple years ago, he works at a university, and he has these international students and students from all around the world that come, but he had a Hawaiian student, not international obviously, they're still American, but they're from Hawaii, and these international students, Hawaiian student too, bring their food culture with them. So this student would bring Spam in all of these neat ways and talk about how that's what they eat in Hawaii. Spam sushi and Spam over rice with pineapple. And Adam, ate it with this student. They brought some things in for him to try, and he really liked it. And so yes, I cook Spam for my husband every now and then because I love him and I want him to be happy. So that's what it takes to be in a successful marriage. Same thing with the Ortega taco sauce. I've tried multiple home canned taco sauce recipes. My son David loves that Ortega taco sauce. None of the home canned one matched that. That's what he likes, and I want him to be happy, so I make that for him. So that's the thing. That's what life is about. It's about balance. We raise our own meat. I know it's the highest quality and the healthiest. I try to can a lot of what we eat or freeze it. We grow it ourselves when we can. I think that our bodies can maybe handle a little bit of this stuff as a treat. So life is about balance. That's how I feel about that. So most of this stuff is like condiments, ketchup, mustard, Tabasco sauce, all those things I've tried making myself. None of my family liked my homemade ketchup as much as they like this Aldi brand organic ketchup. It's actually pretty cheap. I don't mind buying that for them. You saw hot sauces on the shelf. I've made them. Adam does not like them as much as he likes his, Tabasco sauce that he absolutely loves on everything. And so I use my home canned hot sauces when a recipe might call for a little bit of hot sauce in it. But if Adam is using a hot sauce to sprinkle on his food, he's going to use the Tabasco because that's what he's used to and he likes. So a lot of that. Let me see what are some of our other staples that we keep down here. Coconut cream is a huge one for us. I buy this by the case because we can't have dairy. My son has an anaphylactic allergy to dairy. So anytime a recipe would call for a heavy whipping cream or a cream, this is what we use in place of it. I use this to make homemade whipped cream for my kids. We have an ice cream maker. This is what I use to make ice cream, so I like to keep a lot of this in stock for those kinds of things, because obviously if I'm making ice cream, one of these isn't going to go very far. We need 3 of those to make a batch of ice cream for the kids for ice cream cones. All sorts of things. Baking powder kept down here. What else? Canned meat like tuna fish and sardines, all of that. So that's where we keep our store-bought stuff. Now I do have up here freeze-dried. Ooh, it's dusty down here. I should have dusted the tops of these before I did this tour, but this is real life, and it's dusty. It's a cellar, so it gets dusty. Freeze-dried green beans that were store-bought, and this says these are best used by November 2037. This was probably bought 2012. Does that sound right? That sounds about right, because we were at our old house when Adam and I really started like bulking up our food storage. So I would be curious. I think one day I'm going to do a video on making a meal out of 12-year-old store-bought freeze-dried green beans, and I think I have a thing of chicken. Because at the time, we had a small family, and this seemed like a lot, but I bet for us, this could just make a meal for our whole family with these 2 big containers that I have. So I'll have to do that, and we'll see how this Mountain House brand tastes after, 15 years or whatever. I have 5 bins here, and these are freeze-dried foods. Each bin is organized by category. So on the bottom, I have whole freeze-dried meals. I can see from the outside here, like I have a rice that's cooked with salsa and broth, so kind of like a Spanish rice. There's a vegetable soup right there. So what a lot of those are is if I make a meal and I have just enough left over for like 1 or 2 servings, and I know it's not going to feed the kids for the next day's lunch, and maybe Adam didn't want it or I didn't want it the next day, and I already have like half a freeze dryer ready to go and I just need another tray, I'll just pop those leftovers in the freeze dryer and then bag them up, and then I end up with a ready to go meal. So I think it would also be fun sometime for me to pull some of these out of storage, and we'll just do a week of like freeze dried meals. If you guys would like that, let me know, and we can give an honest review of how the food tastes coming out of the freeze dryer and eating it that way. So there's a whole tub of freeze-dried whole meals ready to go. This whole tub is eggs, so there's a lot in there. They're just like kind of packed in there. Each Mylar bag has probably 2 dozen eggs in it, and there's a lot of bags in there. So just like this beef is an insurance policy, all of these eggs are an insurance policy. If we ever had a year where a predator somehow got a hold of our whole flock of chickens, I cannot imagine how devastating that would be. That has happened to my friends before. Or sickness. There's like disease that can go through your flock, and you end up having to cull all of the birds from your flock and start over. Anybody who's raised chickens know that from hatching or buying chicks, it can take up to 6 months before they even start laying, and maybe even longer before they're laying consistently and enough for your needs. So what I like is having these eggs here, because if something like that were to ever happen, this is our insurance policy. Hopefully these eggs could get us through that period until we could raise a new flock. So for now, what we use them for is just randomly to supplement, maybe in the winter here and there if we run out of water glassed eggs or just kind of low, we can grab a bag for a meal or 2 a week or something like that. But I like having that packed full of eggs as kind of an insurance policy. And just like with the store-bought freeze-dried eggs, this is supposed to stay good as long as it's properly sealed in the Mylar. It was completely dry, and you use the oxygen absorber in there for 25 years. It's guaranteed to stay fresh in there, so it's a great insurance policy in my opinion. This container is all vegetables, so from the outside I can see like sweet corn. We've got peppers and okra and zucchini and all sorts of things in there. And I don't technically love the taste of freeze-dried vegetables when they're rehydrated just as like a straight side dish. These are great for soups, and I've done that before where I just wanted to like grab some beef broth or maybe grab some tomato juice and just dump some freeze-dried vegetables in there with some onion and garlic, and it's delicious. So that's a great way to store those for that purpose. This is our snack bin. These are freeze-dried fruits. So in there we have freeze-dried blueberries, apple slices, peach slices, all sorts of different banana slices, pineapple, you name it. And a lot of these I will use when we're going to the park or going on a hike at the park or something like that. I'll come down here and grab a couple bags of these and put them in my diaper bag to take for the kids. It's just really a convenient way to give them a snack while we're out on the trail or whatever, that doesn't involve, you know, bringing a big old bag of apples or something like that. So those are probably the most eaten freeze-dried food that we have. Those get replenished the most often. And then this top bin is just full of miscellaneous stuff that needs to be organized into the other bins. So that is most of our freeze-dried stash. We have a little bit in other places, but yeah, I think it would be fun. I've never done like a week of eating freeze-dried food. I think it would be neat to do. You guys have seen that we have a lot of these bins stacked up. These are pretty handy. I'll put a link to them in the video description, but these are where we store a lot of our bulk extra dried goods. Like this one is full of not full of pasta. It's actually getting pretty low on pasta, so I need to do an Azure order to refill that. That's what we keep in these. So I have about 10 or so of these, and the advantage to using these over just regular 5-gallon buckets is the fact that they're stackable like this. Although I do only stack things in this that aren't super heavy. So the pasta's okay in this. And I think I have paper goods in this one, like our extra muffin cups and coffee filters and parchment paper and things like that. You don't want to put anything too heavy in these, or I find that it puts weight on them and it makes them harder to open. But if you keep light things in these, they're really nice for stacking. Otherwise, let me show you how I keep the rest of them back here. So I moved the rest of them back here into this hallway. It's really dark, and I apologize for the lighting. But because these have the heavier items in them, I know I have one with like chocolate chips in them. Another one has bags of like 5-pound bags of salt and things. They're so heavy that they do better on shelves laid out like this so that they're still easy enough to open. So, like I said, the advantage of these is that they're easy to access. If you have stacked up 5-gallon buckets, which I actually do have over here in this corner, I'll show you. With those, you've got to remove the buckets on the top to get to the ones on the bottom, whereas these can, you know, you can access everything without having to move. Adam scored these really nice shelves from his work. They were in the dumpster, and he's like, I'm taking them. And it just had the shelves. All he had to do was get some of this PVC pipe here, and we assembled these shelves, and they work great because they're heavy duty and can support a ton of weight. So this shelving unit back here, besides having these storage things of dried goods, I also keep like extra canning supplies, empty jars. I even have like the charcoal for our green egg smoker up there that stays down here. So this is a nice little space. You can see it all back there. And then down here, I have a couple of buckets. There's 4 over here. So there's 4 buckets here, and I believe there's 6 at the entrance over there. And that is where I keep the bulk amounts of the things that I showed you upstairs that I keep in the smaller glass containers. So there's one of buckwheat, there's one of whole corn. I think we have salt down here. I think there might be 2 full of salt. Can't ever have enough salt. Split peas. There's a whole thing of lima beans. There's another one of pinto beans. Anything that I buy in a 50-pound quantity that goes down here in 5-gallon buckets. And then I bring my glass gallon jars down here, refill, and those head back up to the pantry. The last bit down here, let me show you. And then in this big drum, this is where I keep my extra wheat berries. I have usually in 50-pound bags. That's a 5-gallon Mylar bag of hard white wheat. And then this, just recently, last week, I decided to put my soft white wheat that I had upstairs into these smaller Mylar bags here that just hold enough to maybe fill up the 1-gallon glass jar. because carrying those big old 50-pound bags up and down the cellar stairs was just not happening for this mama. So I've started preserving these in smaller Mylar bags, and these are the extras. Like, these pretty much will live down here. I have wheat berries that are in 5-gallon buckets that I'll use up first. These are my insurance policy. If ever, like, Azure Standard were out of the wheat berries and I couldn't get them for a while, that's what this barrel is sort of for down here. Okay guys, so that is pretty much the extent of my working pantry upstairs and the food storage that I have downstairs. I could talk about food storage all day long, but this is probably already too long of a video. So we will talk about the freezers in another video. So we are a family of 10. It takes a lot of food to feed us. And this, I mean, honestly, you could look at this and think this isn't even really a lot of food for a family of 10. But a majority of our meals usually center around the meat, the protein source. That's up in freezers. A lot of the fruits and veggies that I preserved this year were frozen, just simply because of energy and not wanting to be in the hot kitchen canning when I was pregnant and tired and not wanting to be on my feet. So you'll get to see a lot of that stuff in the freezer tour, but I'm feeling pretty good. This is a little earlier than I usually do my tour. I think I tend to do my pantry tour in mid-October or maybe longer. And sorry, the sump pump was distracting me. It's making a dripping noise. So you're usually seeing my cellar once the preservation season is typically all the way over. So I have some things still to pull out of the garden. All of our winter squash hasn't been harvested, and I have this nice little table that my camera is sitting on right now that sits kind of in the center of this space that will be full of all of our winter squash. That will live down here. I think I'm going to leave most of that raw this year to preserve. And yeah, we're looking pretty good for the year. I feel good about this. You know, considering everything I had going on this year with my garden maybe not being the best. I just struggled to maintain the garden this year with not feeling 100%, and then having limited energy during canning season. I'm actually proud of what I was able to accomplish this year. So, you know, life isn't perfect. You have great years. I've had years where I've put up way more food than this, and I've had years where I've put up less. So we do what we can, and I'm pretty proud of our efforts. So hopefully this gives you a peek into what we're working with, and as usual, we will do a pantry challenge series in January and February this year and show you how I cook from all of this stuff. So we will be using this food before then, like we're already starting to use some of this food, but a lot of this I try to hold off on digging into until those winter months when I don't have the fresh produce coming in from the garden available. All right, I've rambled long enough, you guys. I'm going to let you go. Thanks for being here. We will see you next week. Until then, friends, I hope you have a great week. Bye.